What if India was never partitioned? India and Pakistan today are two nations that are extremely hostile and resentful towards one another. However, just 7 decades ago, they were part of the same nation under the British Crown and common subjects of the same government. How did it come to be this way? And what if this division never were to happen? Would history be any different? Would the course of human events throughout the world be altered in any meaningful way? Of course, but some background in the first place. The partition of India came about in 1947 as both Muslim and Hindu leaders decided that breaking up was best to preserve religious and political identities without interference from the other. The resulting bloodshed was not what those leaders had envisioned. Millions of people died or went missing in the fighting and riots between Hindus and Muslims as vast portions of the population found themselves in supposedly hostile territory. This unimaginable violence was not simply a spontaneous expression of hatred and brutality, but in many cases were planned and organized. For example, in the state of Punjab, the soldiers had recently come back from World War II, and the place was awash in weapons. Some people actually formed paramilitary groups and used the chaos of the partition to settle old scores and secure their own power. So, both Pakistan and India faced huge problems accommodating and rehabilitating post-partition refugees, especially when they went to war over Jammu and Kashmir in 1947. Later bouts of communal tension generated further movement, with some migration still happening in the 1960s. So how's the situation today? Today, India and Pakistan are basically the worst enemies you can imagine. Kashmir is the main problem, the state of Kashmir, and who actually owns that state. But there is also the issue of nuclear weapons and religion, also Muslim versus Hindu. 7 decades after the partition of India and Pakistan, over 1 billion people live in the shadow of partition. And the partition left the two countries who had once shared the same culture, same people and land, into perhaps the two most bitter enemies on the face of the planet today. Now we're asking, what if that event never happened? What if the partition were to never happen, and how could this possibly happen? Well, the future Prime Minister of India at the time, Jawaharlal Nehru, was all for a united India, while the future leader of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was not. Partition also was basically a last-minute compromise, and even people like Gandhi were against it. So it goes without saying that the partition was not the most realistic nor thought-out and deliberate plan. The British were stuck between a rock and a hard place, and seeking a way out of governing India, because, their economy was in shambles after World War II. So, they decided to compromise and allow a partition. Now, in this alternate timeline, say that Jinnah gives in and submits to a united India. What would happen next? Well, violence between Muslims and Hindus would still continue, yet there will be greater amounts of troops to control that violence. With the initial unrest tamed, things go back to normal, just as they did before during the colonial era. In this alternate timeline, the Indian army is not divided by religion, caste, or creed. So, even though they might not be as powerful as the US or the Chinese army, the Indian army will be much more powerful. It's not like they're divided and fighting against each other. With that increased military power, the Indo-Chinese wars of the 1960s would not have been epic failures for India, and India could have stood up against Chinese aggression in protecting the autonomy of Tibet. The 1999 Kargil War between Pakistan and India, and basically any other conflict between Pakistan and India, would not exist. Terrorism could be controlled since Pakistan is not supporting it as they do in our timeline. Troops stationed at a border with Afghanistan that India would share in this timeline will be able to prevent terrorists from coming into India and causing terror like they did in Bombay. On a more fun note, the Indian cricket team would also be much more powerful since they have both the best players from India and Pakistan. And the Iran-India pipeline, which was conceptualized in the 1950s to connect Iran to India in supplying natural gas, would actually happen in this timeline, and it would benefit India overall. So India, if united today, would still have societal issues. I'm not saying that problems between Hindus and Muslims would disappear overnight just because of partition. It wouldn't. There would still be an issue of religion, and Hindu politicians, like they do in our timeline, would try to curb Muslim power, and there would still be violence between Hindus and Muslims. That would probably never end for the foreseeable future. But I'm saying that India as a nation would be much more powerful, would not be divided, would not have a perpetual enemy that they were to worry about. They would be united the population would be much bigger, and actually would be the biggest Muslim nation in the world in this timeline. That honor belongs to Indonesia actually right now. But India would be basically what it was meant to be. It would be virtually the most populated nation in this timeline, of course, and it would be one of the more powerful nations as well, more powerful than it is today. So those are my thoughts on what if the partition of India never happened.
Okay, let's finish out by looking at the plausibility of the scenario. As far as alternate history goes, it was pretty plausible. Partition was not favored by the British. In fact, their desire for a united India was an outcome of both their pride in having politically unified the subcontinent and the doubts of most British authorities as to the feasibility of Pakistan. Partition was caused mainly by the refusal of the Muslim League and the Indian National Congress to compromise. Beginning 2 decades before partition, Jinnah tried to reach an agreement with the Congress Party and failed. The sticking points were the ones guaranteeing Muslims political representation, no surprise there. This, Congress did not want to concede. Even as late as 1946, in the cabinet mission hosted by the British, Jinnah and Nehru could have come to a compromise that didn't. And thus Jinnah declared Direct Action Day, a day of mass violence between Muslims and Hindus that pretty much got the ball rolling and made partition inevitable. So both parties are at fault, and if they are compromised, this could have been avoided.
Put your thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more great content. This is Call It The World signing out.